Johnston, Assistant Director of HR and Employment Lawyer at Durham University. And I wanted to share our HR journey so far in the midst of the global pandemic. Just to give you a bit of context, we have around 6,000 staff at Durham, mainly permanent staff, but we've got casual colleagues as well. And in normal times, we'd have around 18,000 students. Many of our students live on site in our colleges, which makes us quite unique as a university. And both of our staff and student body are extremely international. What's the headlines of the last 5 months? Has it been tricky? Yes. Have we pulled together? Yes. Have we had challenges? Yes. But I'm really proud to be a part of what we've achieved so far. So in terms of preparations for the COVID-19 outbreak, I have to be honest and say we had a bit of a heads up. We had a new colleague join us back in January who had come from an Australian university and gave us the heads up that there were things brewing in Australian universities. In particular, they were closer to the start of their academic year, and their international students weren't showing up, which meant potential holes in their finances, and they were having to put in place what they called shock budgets, so having to completely rethink their financial situation. So we could see that if this wave swept our way, that it was going to have a very big impact on our student population and our income, and therefore that we'd need to take some action. At the same time, we have a department of world-leading bioscientists, and they started to model what an outbreak would look like in the university. And they thought that an outbreak within one of our college environments would look like a cruise ship outbreak. And this was at the same time, right at the start of all of this, you might remember, there were passengers stranded in cruise ships off the coast of Japan that couldn't dock. So we took quite an early decision around starting to prepare for people working from home. And looking back on the 24th of February, I emailed my colleagues in other Russell Group universities, which are the big research intensive universities, and said, is anyone else doing any HR prep for this? And the resounding answer was, no, not really, not yet. It's a business resilience problem. As an HR senior team, we decided that we would draft some FAQs and some comms, and we put them on the back burner for now, just in case we needed them. And we included things like, what does self-isolation look like? Oh my word, what if the schools close? All of those things that we've just got used to as part of normal life now. So come early to the middle of March, we had trialled and we all went to work from home. We knew, or we thought, it would be long term. Myself and many of my colleagues brought our work chairs with us, for example, because we thought we'd be at home for a fair chunk of time. We were clear from the outset that colleagues wouldn't be disadvantaged in terms of their pay, certainly in the short term, and we've continued with that. And there were hot topics from the off, in particular childcare. And we said, use your reasonable endeavours to do as much work as you can when you can. Don't worry about sticking to your rigid working hours, but speak to your manager about when you can work. At that point in time, none of us had even heard of the word furlough, which has brought a whole new meaning to the term FFS, by which I obviously mean the flexible furlough scheme. And we had the added complexity of not just the crystal clear guidance from government on furlough, which generally comes out at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, but we also had some additional stringent requirements in place from the Department for Education to get our heads around. Have we had challenges with working from home? Absolutely. Making sure that colleagues' well-being is top of the agenda, making sure that colleagues take their holidays, making sure people don't burn out, and drafting FAQs has been like repainting the Forth Road Bridge. But we've kept everything going very successfully. Everyone has pulled together. We've had weekly meetings with our trade unions, which has been extremely constructive. And what I can say is that 5 months in, we're thinking about having a dress-up Friday, the only day of the week that you don't wear your trainers or your slippers to come to work. So then we had to turn our minds to reawakening the campus. While the majority of people went to work from home, as an institution we never closed. At any one time, we had about 1,000 students staying in our colleges and another 1,000 or so students staying in private accommodation across the city. Many of those students were international students that could not get home. They were stranded in Durham. So we had hundreds of key workers. Some of them were looking after the students in colleges, others were making sure that research projects didn't fall over, and they might have been research projects that have been ongoing for years and years. Technical support from people like IT. We've got a supercomputer on site that had to be kept going, and things like the post screen as well. So that was our first big HR challenge. How do we get key worker letters to all of these people when we're off site? And many of these colleagues, particularly in more domestic roles, don't have ongoing access to emails when they're at home. But the first challenge was accepted and achieved. We also, right at the start of going to work from home, stepped up a central planning group, so a strategic lead on COVID from each area within the university. And they would oversee all of the activity, and we have dealt with many a diverse thing. I'm on our CPG. So in the early days, we were looking at housing key workers. We housed quite a lot of NHS staff in our colleges. If the army had to be mobilised, we were going to look after the army. We were helping with volunteering in the community. We looked at whether we needed to give across some of our accommodation for homeless charities, if they didn't have anywhere where homeless people could go in the midst of a pandemic. But what we were clear about was that in the midst of all of this, as an institution, we never closed. It was just that our priorities had to change slightly as to who was on and who was off campus, and how we made sure that we looked after our people. What did our priorities look like at this time? Well, our priorities throughout have been to make sure that everybody's safe. As we started to reawaken the bits of the campus that we'd mothballed in the earlier days, we started to turn our attention to making sure that we had a COVID-secure university in accordance with government guidance on that point. We've got a very diverse estate at Durham. We've got a castle. At the other end of the scale, we've got purpose-built, really modern, amazing new buildings. Each one of those buildings needs to pass a 5-stage test to show that the building in itself is COVID-secure. We then need to make sure that roles are COVID-secure as well. All staff will have an individual discussion with their manager, going through a checklist before they come back on site. And that includes specific guidance on health issues. Colleagues that were told to shield, so clinically extremely vulnerable colleagues, will go through a slightly different process with their manager. We also think that shielding was quite a crude tool back in March, and actually more people should probably have been told to shield, in particular people that trigger 2 health or risk factors. So for example, colleagues that might be BAME and diabetic wouldn't have been advised to shield back in March, but we consider they probably would have the same risk factors, and therefore we're treating them in the same way. We think that we can make just about all of the roles in the university COVID secure. There's a small number where we might need to have some additional mitigations in place. And as an institution, we prioritised research over the summer to get research back on site and up and running. In particular, much of our research is laboratory based, and we can't have people sat at home hooking up Bunsen burners to the gas cooker. We certainly wouldn't be encouraging that. So we needed to get our world leading research, particularly in laboratories, back on site. In particular, some of that research is COVID related. Some of you might have seen in the press the work that we're doing with other institutions around the COVID dogs, who hopefully will be able to be trained to sniff out COVID in humans, much like they can sniff out some kinds of cancer, which would make for a very quick testing process. So we've got our research back up and running, and the next thing that we needed to do was start getting ready for our students to return in September. And that's an extremely complex process. And it feels like every time we've sorted something out, there's another challenge comes our way, which I'm sure many colleagues from across HR will appreciate. So, for example, many of our international students have said we can't wait to come back to Durham, but we're a bit worried about flying across. So we're looking with other northeast-based universities at chartering flights to get our students back. We need to make sure that the accommodation's ready. We need to make sure that the catering isn't going to pose any concerns. And many people will have seen that bubbles isn't the word anymore. People should be in segments, not bubbles. And we need to work out how we segment our students in the safest way possible. We need to make sure that our incoming students have the best possible student experience. That includes things like clubs and societies. So table tennis is in, you can socially distance, wrestling's probably out for the time being. We need to make sure that everything we do it safely, and that we provide world-leading teaching. So we've done a huge amount of work around blending the teaching so that some of it's online, which has been a huge amount of work for my academic colleagues, and some of it is face-to-face teaching. And that face-to-face teaching has obviously also needed to be risk assessed. From an HR perspective, we've lent a hand to many of these initiatives, all of the return to campus stuff. We've worked hand in glove with colleagues in health and safety, but there've also been HR challenges as well. As we went into lockdown, we were in the middle of our annual academic recruitment campaign, within which we bring around 120 to 150 internationally renowned academics to Durham each year, which is a great bonus for the North East. So what did we do? We cracked on with it. The assessments and the interviews went online, either Teams or Zoom or Skype, and we deployed our secret weapon, which is our relocation team, who are able to advise candidates on housing, on schools, on what the healthcare system works like here. They can send videos and virtual reality images of the city and also the university so that they understand what they would be coming to, and that's been a huge success. In terms of our crystal ball and looking forward, like all universities, we need to see what the student demand is. We think it will be very healthy at Durham. There'll probably be some drop-off in the number of international students, which we see, but we'll shortly be getting the A-level results in a couple of weeks, and we think that our student numbers will be buoyant. And depending on where those student numbers sit, therefore depends on the staff that we need in each area to be teaching and working in specific areas. So we've still got a huge amount of work to do. We're also working with Public Health England and the Council on an outbreak control team to make sure that if we do have any positive tests of COVID on campus, whether that be staff or students, we appropriately log them. And if 2 people have come into contact within that setting and they've got positive tests, we will have a plan of action to deal with that. And as part of this work, and indeed bringing the students back, we've been doing a huge amount of work with the local community in Durham to make sure that people understand the plans and the mitigations that we've got in place to reopen the campus. So what have I taken from this? Well, I work with a bunch of incredible colleagues, and we have kept one of the North East's cornerstone institutions well ahead of the pack, I think, and we've worked smoothly to hopefully transition our students back on site in September and make sure that we get our staff back up and running in the workplace and entirely safe. Thank you very much.